what to do about this evaluation. It's
not clear.
So, the implementation happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
Evaluation involves establishing criteria, gathering data, and revising your goals if you need to. Each group has to submit a method of evaluation to their instructor, and I'm going to have each one of you do that because you each need to get a clinical grade for that. So we talked about that. So you're going to look at your goals, see if you met them, and if not, if they changed. Somebody said, hey, my goals were not even the same when we got to STEM. So what were your goals? So revise those if you need to. Were they met? What kind of data did you gather? Somebody did a little survey on what they ate. Just include any findings with that. What else? Any surveys or questionnaires? Just observation notes. I was thinking just a one-page thing, no more than one page. Kind of including all that. Okay, reports of each phases of the nursing phases of the nursing process. You pretty much did that along the way. I don't feel like I need that from my group because you guys submitted all that stuff.
Yeah.
So talk to your advisors, but I feel like, we had some steps and, you had stuff due at a certain time and you needed that in. So I don't think you need to go back and, redo that. So,
But the evaluation page, like the paper that you're asked for to gather the data, we did that as a group. So we each are going to do an individual paper on the same information. I'm not understanding why we're going to do it individually as opposed to a group since we collectively got all the information at STEM.
right.
Because,
So, just what were your findings on it?
okay. But you want each, the findings for my, so do we do that part together and we're doing an evaluation of the project of each other separately? I mean, what?
If you look at the rubric, it's each individual person, they meet all those criteria. So, if you want to just submit one, that's fine.
I mean, that's what we did in the first
all
with
the other
you.
parts.
Yeah, but now we're
Okay.
individually making sure everybody
Understand.
did their part. Okay. Does that help clarify?
Can we put it through task trace?
Yeah, what did we put on task trace?
The rubrics is posted in 111. Yeah.
Oh, we're ready to move on.
Just submit that.
So we just type up an evaluation and put it into tasks under STEM project.
Right. Exactly. Okay.
With an audit sheet, they said after audit we get our paper.
Actually, I was looking at your audit sheet and it's not included.
Yeah, I didn't think it was on there.
So don't worry about the audit sheet.
Okay.
That was my mistake. Because there's not even a slot. Actually, I'm wondering if there's a slot for last week. One more slot.
Yeah, there is. There is another slot because I have OR last.
So, just put it in the task trace. If you want to designate one person to put your surveys and findings, but, you can just send an email out and everybody does the same thing. I don't care about that.
Okay.
Are all of the instructors in task trace so we can submit it?
Well, that's what I asked Ms. Ford. I said, the senior instructors are, so we will look at that. Okay, write myself in that to make sure. I'm not sure she got that done. All right, any other questions about that? Look over the rubric, so you guys can see the rubric, right?
And the rubric's on task.
Right.
You can see it on there.
Yes, so just make sure that,
Y'all bring your surveys.
I
Yes.
turned everything in on their Facebook page. I've got all our data collected and everything. All they have to do is write the page based on all the information I submitted last night.
okay,
Got everything you need.
okay,
But we can go over it after class and go over it in
okay.
detail.
So what would be your evaluation goal met? verbalized correct answers to, just like you do on your test.
It's like a,
Okay? All right.
like an outline.
Well, I like outlines,
You guys did
Yeah.
basically set up
Any
what
other
did you do as soon as your intervention, and then your goals. Did they understand?
All right. So you want to go through a little review real quick?
Almost like an outline of
Okay.
and
So what is involution? Uterus coming back down, right? And how quickly does it do that? Okay. Okay.
It could be at the level of the
Right. And then how much after that do we expect that uterus to come down?
1 to 2 every 24 hours.
1 to 2 centimeters, finger breaths. Go by finger breaths, right? Every 24 hours, right? Okay. All right. And what is subinvolution?
Failure to return.
Failure of the uterus. And we'll talk more about early hemorrhage and late postpartum hemorrhages and which will be the cause. Okay? But why is that usually what happens that causes that to happen?
The uterus fails to clamp down.
Right. And why does it fail to clamp down? Retain placental parts, right? Or infection. Very good. All right. Okay. Lochia rubra usually lasts how many days?
1 to 3.
2 to 3 days, and then we see what? Serosa, very good. And how long do we see that? 3 to 10. And then from 10 to 6 weeks, we see what? Albus, very good. Okay. And what do we want to tell our moms if they start passing clots?
Bigger than a golf ball.
If it's a golf ball or larger, call us, leave it, don't flush, and we'll want to wash it. Yep. And if the mom goes through the stages of rubra, serosa, and gets to alba and goes back to rubra, what do we suspect? Subinvolution. So they check where that fundus is, and we'll talk more about it. That is a sign of late postpartum, so they'll be bleeding a lot. Okay, and it's that dark blood. So they should, once they get past that, they shouldn't go back to it, right? Okay. All right. Let me know if there's anything else you want to clarify.
I had a quick question under the cardio. I was looking through, like someone gave me some notes to borrow and look through from last year, and we had the cardiac output returns to normal at about 6 to 12 weeks. They had 6 months, and I just wanted to clarify if it was the 6 to 12 weeks. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. Yes. You know, we don't freak out, and that's what I tell my postpartum students when we're checking postpartum moms is, you know, sometimes moms, a lot of us have a little sag, I should say, to our belly button, so you kind of have to prop it up sometimes and see where it would be if there wasn't a sag there. We don't get really bent out of shape if it's one of them. What would we be concerned about, or what would we want to have action on? Take action. Okay, and if it's off to the right, okay? If it's off to the right and up, what are we going to have them do? Go to the back. Oh, I went at 6. Well, let's just go ahead and go again. And then recheck. Okay?
So my question was for books, that it would be 11, like function 11.
Minus 1.
Is that right?
At 24 hours? Yeah. You know. Minus 1. Yeah. I won't give you that. That's. Let's look at the test again and clarify. Okay. Any other questions that you think of? Okay. Let's see. So we don't worry about constipation, right? Till what day? 3 days. 3 days. Yeah. and they're at risk of, with their urinary system being dilated and their bladder stretched out. What are they at risk of? UTIs. So what do we want to tell them?
Go to the bathroom every 2 hours.
Yes, empty your bladder every 2 hours, right? Labs, what does the white count typically, where do we see that? Elevated. So it's slightly elevated for the first 6 days. So what is our better diagnoser of infertility? Okay, all right, we good? Okay, so we got that. So our moms go in through a couple phases, and one of them is called taking in, and one of them is taking hold. And with the taking in period, the mom is really self-consumed, okay? They're very hesitant to take care of the baby. They're not jumping right in, and sometimes this can be interpreted as they're not bonding with their baby. So we have to remember that this is a normal phase that they go through, the taking in phase, okay? So they're passive, they want people to take care of the baby and take care of them. So it's kind of like all about them at this particular time, okay? Others, they would rather make the decisions for them, and it takes about 2 to 3 days. So by the second day, they get to the taking hold. And that's where they're taking hold of their mothering responsibilities, and they're ready to take care of that baby. And this is a great time to teach our moms because they're ready to, just absorb that information. So it's never good to try to teach a mom the first day. I mean, we tell them, but they're probably not taking it in too much because they're just all about themselves right now. And that's normal. So when we're looking at different cultures, it's very important, and I searched again this morning, and we should come up with a cultural video because there are none on YouTube. So we should do that as a class. There were some classes that did it, but I wasn't really impressed. I do have one video that'll show you after this, but it was really hard to find videos. But just a little bit about some different cultures. Europeans tend to like a full meal and have large amounts of iced liquids after birth. So Europeans like a big meal and large amounts of iced liquids. And I'm sure some of you have heard about the hot and cold stuff, and we're going to get into that in a minute. They believe that the food restores energy, and fluids, of course, replace the fluids lost, which is right on target. They like to ambulate fairly quickly after birth, shower, wash their hair, put on a fresh gown, and they may not want to stay in the hospital that long. They may or may not want education. I think we're very familiar with our Islamic culture. What are they? What's the big things about them? They're covered, right? They have their head covered, their whole body's covered except for their hands and their feet. Okay, they're very modest. And they typically don't want any man to take care of them. unless, other than their husband, of course, or a family member. They really don't even want a man to be alone in the room with them. Okay, so I haven't had a lot of experience with working with Islamics, mothers in labor to see if they typically go with a female obstetrician, but I would think they would for that reason. But they're very modest. And that's with all these cultures. You always want to ask them, what cultural practices do you plan to use, and how can we help you with those, right? Yes.
They do typically use a female.
Okay.
I work with a lady and I was telling her about mine. She said, "You have a male?"
Yeah. Yeah, great. Okay, that's what I would think. And then there's some cultures that have different postpartum routines and rituals to restore the hot and cold balance of the body. And when we're talking about hot and cold balance of the body, they're not really talking about the temperature of the body. Hispanics, Africans, and Asian cultures avoid cold right after birth. So our Hispanics, African, and Asian cultures, some of them, avoid cold after birth. And when they say they avoid cold, they don't want the air. They want it to be too chilly in the room, or get out in the cold wind. And some of them avoid all water at all, even if it's heated. And some only drink room temperature water. Some Mexican descent moms may avoid hot foods, and this they consider to be pork, so they avoid pork. Pork.
Did you call it hot food?
Hot food. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot of cultures also, and I think we do that in America too, where the extended family helps out with the mom. Another word for postpartum is puerperia. So you're going to see that term. I think it's a fairly new term for postpartum. Like this is the new term for postpartum. Puerperia. So a lot of times in cultures, the grandmother often comes in, moves in for a while to help the mom and the infant. And they bring wisdom and experience. A little bit about our Orthodox Jewish people. They are also very modest. They keep their head hair covered. And for the first 7 days, they get a lot of special treatment and attention and cared for by their family. And they request a kosher diet. Everybody know what a kosher diet is? No? Okay. But,
what is it? Dairy and meat have to be made separate?
No pork. So a lot of you guys separate. Yeah, no pork. So the meats have to come from animals that chew their cud and that have split hooves. Okay? So these are your cows and your sheep and your goats. No pigs. And then also there's kosher fowl. And those are our chickens. They're domesticated fowl. Cornish hens, ducks, geese, and turkeys. This is just for your information. I won't test it. And the meats have to be properly prepared. They're really particular about. They have to wash them and get every little trace of blood off the meat. So that's about the meat. The dairy has to come from a kosher animal also. Cow's milk, goat's milk, cheeses. And then they call it parabie. It's the third category. And this is your eggs, your fish, your fruit, your vegetables, your grains. They're neither meat or dairy, and they can't be processed. So no hot dogs or bologna, that kind of thing. And they can't mix. Okay, so if the meat's prepared over here, the parabean has to be prepared over there. So it's really particular about it. Anybody know more about that to add? Yes.
It has a name, and I forget the name in Arabic, but the girl that I work with that's Islamic, she eats that, and it was funny because I was sharing my meal with her the other day, and I had chicken inside fish, and I said, "Do you want some of my fish?" And she said,
No
I said,
fish.
wait, you know the chicken? I said, hold on, you can have the side that's over here. So she would eat that.
She was okay with
She was
that?
okay with that just because it didn't touch.
Yeah, if it touched, you would eat it. Yeah. Yeah.
And if it's pepperoni on a pizza, they won't eat it because
It's processed.
even if you take the pepperoni off,
Yeah, it is contaminated. Yeah.
Oh.
Very interesting. You die without processed food.
I'm trying to learn it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And you know, the best way to learn it is to talk to your patients too. And you know, what can we do and see what dietary practices. We are very much a melting pot, aren't we? Very acculturated and all the cultures. What were you going to say, Angela?
When I was going back home, we went to a deli, and my coworker is Jewish. And I was like, "Oh, can I have a sausage and cheese?" And the guy was like, "What?" And I was like, "Pastrami, maybe cheddar." I mean, I was like, "Pea," because like, you know, like he's like it's kosher. I was like, "Okay." So I had seen on the side.
What kind of cheese can I have?
And they refused to make the sandwich that way. It was like, no, on pastrami, on rye, with the relish, whatever. And I was like,
I would think pastrami.
no, it was fresh. Like they had it. Like it was really, it was delicious, but
Yeah. Okay, some other things are they avoid physical contact between the woman and the man while they're experiencing any vaginal discharge. Rest is crucial for 6 weeks. They breastfeed. And you've probably heard about this where they don't name the baby until a later time. And they don't circumcise the baby until a later time. They have a big ceremony. You get what that's called. They have a big ceremony.
that's more of the Orthodox.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Their Sabbath, I think this is interesting also because it may hit when they're in the hospital to know about, begins sundown on Friday and ends after dark on Saturday. So during that time, neither the man or the woman will use electricity, travel, or write. They also will not tear or cut anything. So the nurses have to basically tear the toilet paper for them because they won't even tear off a piece of toilet paper. So that's kind of interesting. Has anyone worked with
Sundown Friday.
someone?
Till Saturday, sundown.
I haven't either. So, and also, since they can't write, you've got to get all your consent signed before that. So the nurse has to adjust the bed, because they won't use the controls on the bed, they've got to clear the toilet paper, and turn off the lights.
Would they take IVs at that time?
Would they what?
If you're in their Sabbath, would they take IVs because of the being electronic and tearing the skin?
Maybe not. You might have to do it.
No, that's they aren't doing it.
Oh, that's true.
The point of Sabbath is that they are resting,
Okay.
so they couldn't start knifing.
Right. Okay, but they're okay with
They're
it
fine
running.
to start one.
Okay, but they won't turn on and off the lights, but they're okay with having the light on. Okay. Right.
Yeah, they're not gonna.
Yeah.
I mean, the ones like the few people that I know that are Orthodox don't have an issue with you turning the light on. They're just not gonna do it.
They're not. Okay. Thank you for asking.
I know they use like hurricane lamps and things
During the Sabbath,
or like candles.
so they don't have to sit in the lights. So that's all interesting. Okay, well, I have one little YouTube video.
So I wonder for Thursday if they prep some tissues or toilet paper so they can go back. Or
What this says next to
can't ignore your bodily function. Just because you still have to get up and go to the bathroom. Like, I can understand you're not working and tearing fabric and sewing.
A couple of Asian women are going to describe their practices.
I think the day that I told my mom I was pregnant, she said, "Oh, you have to stay in bed for 30 days after you give birth. Also means you can't shower for 30 days. And I was like, okay, that's gross. So I was like, I'm married. I can't not shower for 30 days. Because, you know, when my mom was talking about everything, she said, okay, the whole point is not to catch wind. So in Vietnamese culture, it's what we call dong ya, which means when you catch wind. So after a lot of back and forth, she said, okay, fine, but you have to have like the heater on full blast and you have to take a really hot shower in just like 3 minutes and then you dry your hair. So, you know, I think she was a little bit flexible in that way, but she would still make me feel guilty. She's like, oh, if your grandmother knew, you know, that you were still showering, you know, she'd be yelling at me. So
I was reading a book where they did touch a little bit on the Philippines, and that was surprising to me because I hadn't read anything thus far that related to like birth practices in the Philippines. And this was it was specific to Cebu, in the central part of the Philippines. And there, they view the placenta as kind of like the twin soul of the child, and they would bury it under the front steps of the house to keep it close to the home. And I like the idea of kind of burying it. And I love to plant things. I like to garden. So I kind of mix those two things. And we planted it in the backyard under a tree that my mother-in-law had given us.
So I drank so much ginger tea. I mean, she did this whole thing where she would, you know, slice the ginger and she would roast it, you know, for about a half an hour until it was a little burnt. And she would brew this concoction with, you know, ginger, lemon, and rock sugar for a couple hours. And she would give me a glass almost every hour. You know, she was really careful about making sure that anything I took out of the refrigerator, I would have to heat up. Because, you know, she said if I put something cold in my body that I would sort of slow down the process of healing. Well, I think it's more heat because ginger has those properties, and so it's it just heats up the body quickly, and so when you're eating it or drinking it, it immediately warms up the body and it sort of strengthens that flow of energy.
And the birth plan did include some postpartum things like having food ready for when I came back from the hospital. And so we had tinola ready for me. It's just like a chicken-based soup with ginger. It's one of those kinds of dishes where it's very nutritious, and it's like one thing all in itself. You have your protein, your vegetables, and it was something that was a comfort food for me and my partner because we grew up with it.
You know, I realized that going on, and if I had, you know, my own grandchildren, that I would want, you know, my future daughter-in-law or my future daughter to you know, continue the practice. And I could share with them that, you know, it's something that's been going on for many, many generations, that, it's really key in keeping ourselves healthy, keeping our bodies healthy, and keeping our future generations healthy as well. Yeah, I think it was really deep for me, because I did resist it at first, but I don't think it's because I didn't really understand it. During the first birth, everything was so unknown. It was my first baby, and going to that, finding those traditions was really grounding for me. One, because I didn't identify with the other information and the resources out there. I was identifying as a woman of color, very connected to her culture and her culture and her heritage. I didn't really find the resources out there relevant to me. The family is really my foundation as a person, as somewhere to start. And so I wanted to really give that to both Drew and I during the birthing process and to our children.
From Africa. Yeah. Are there any cultural practices that your culture does?
Yeah. Second from the boy.
Oh, they don't circumcise until 16 years. That's cruel. Stay in the house with mom for 6 months.
Yeah. Well, with the grandmother, the mom don't believe it. We just stay in the house, and the grandmother takes care of the baby.
And the grandmother takes care of the baby, and the mother doesn't do anything. Special diet or
We eat a lot of fried people, after the baby, we have to eat this 5 people, and then they use the 5 people to put in the baby milk, we believe that.
and the babies, in the spices in the baby's milk.
Yeah, we believe that makes the baby stronger. And
So is it a hot cold thing or no?
no,
It's just spicy kills any potential germs.
yeah,
It's
it's
kind
the
of
baby.
yes. Cool. Does anybody else have a particular? Oh, you do? Yeah. Oh.
I'm a Apache Indian.
Oh, Apache Indian.
I'm not sure really about birthing traditions, but when a girl has her period, the baby can have a 4-day ceremony where she doesn't eat or drink anything. She leaves for the 4 days. Pretty much is like a test of her stamina and everything. It's like her
I sure don't feel like dancing. So did everybody hear that? When they have their period, then they have a big party, so everybody knows, I guess. And the girl dances, but she says they have a strong,
it's like a test of her ability.
pretty much stamina test,
She doesn't eat it 4 days.
and she doesn't eat her lips.
She doesn't like a period. She has her time.
That is my very important and strong.
They think they have healing powers at that time because
The Fulani tribespeople.
You guys want to take a quick break? 10 minutes, so we're back at 22.